thinketh in his heart, so is he. That the way that we think determines the way we live. That all of our life flow out of our understanding of what we believe to be true and believe of how we ought to live. We can say this another way. We can say ideas have consequences. Ideas have consequences. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And so our actions come out of our internal, don't we? The internal produces the external. Jesus said in Mark chapter 7, verse 21, "For from within, out of the abundance of heart proceed," and then he gives a whole list of evil activity coming out of an evil heart. God wants the motivation of our heart to be right and our understanding to be right so that we may live rightly, because the way that we think does affect the way that we live, and the actions that we do result in consequences, don't they? So, for every action there are consequences, both now and forever. Like, for example, trying to get too much on one line. For every action there are consequences, both now and forever. So one idea then leads to another idea, and that leads to a particular conclusion, doesn't it? And let's just give an example of that. Let's just, with a silly illustration to make it easy to say, let's say all blibs are all green. And then suppose we just say that Ralph is a blib. All right. What is the conclusion you come to about Ralph? If you begin with all blibs are all green and Ralph is a blib, what is the conclusion you have about Ralph then? All right. Ralph is all green. Ralph is all green. All right, so here's a conclusion. We could also call a conclusion, well, if this is true and this is true, well, then I suppose this must be true. So another word you can use for a conclusion would be a supposition. A supposition. It's what you come to as a result of ideas that you've had before that idea, and reasoning from that idea, you come to a logical conclusion, some particular conclusion which follows logically from this first idea. So the idea that you've had before your supposition and before your conclusion then, people have called that prior to that supposition, or it's a prior or pre to it, it's called that a presupposition. A presupposition. So if you start out with a particular presupposition and you reason logically from that presupposition, you would end up with a logical conclusion of a presupposition. See? So every presupposition would have its logical conclusions. See? And we said if you begin with the presupposition that all the reality is only molecules, a logical conclusion of that would be that people have no value because they're just molecules like everything else. If you begin with the presupposition that the whole reality is only God stuff, the presupposition of pantheism, again, then you have that a rotten tomato is God's stuff, and so there is no distinction between people and rotten tomatoes, and again, people have no value. The logical conclusion then is that people are without value, which comes from the presupposition of either of materialism or of pantheism. Both presuppositions end up with the same logical conclusion. If you begin with different presuppositions, you can end up with different conclusions, can't you? Suppose instead of believing that all blibs are all green, you believe that all blibs are all orange. Now, obviously, the conclusion about Ralph is that Ralph is all orange. Now, let's suppose that Sue believes all blibs are all green, and Darcy believes that all blibs are all orange. So the logical conclusion that now neither Sue nor Darcy has seen Ralph before, and not having ever seen Ralph before, they just have to have a conclusion, or they say, well, and I say, well, Darcy, what color is Ralph? And Darcy says, well, I suppose he must be orange because all blibs are all orange. I say, Sue, what color is Ralph? And Sue says, well, I suppose Ralph is all green because all blibs are all green. So then I can ask this question. They're giving two different answers, and Ralph cannot be all green, all orange, because orange and green are different colors, and you can't be all one color and then somebody else believe it's all another color and both of them be right. Maybe both of them are wrong, but they can't both be right. And now, so I got to try to figure out which one's right then. Well, maybe I can do it by giving them an IQ test to find out which one is most intelligent. And I find out that Sue and Darcy are both equally brilliant people, see? And the conclusion they come to, though, they come to end up with different conclusions, and the conclusion that you have, then there is not a factor or a matter of your intelligence, see? The conclusions are different because they began with different presuppositions. And what we're talking about here among us is important that we begin with God's truth in our thinking and our living. If we don't begin with what God says, then we will end up with wrong conclusions and a wrong way of living. And here's another thing. If a person starts out with a wrong presupposition and they're brilliant and very logical, they will very logically, extremely logically, go to a wrong conclusion. So the more brilliant you are, the more brilliantly wrong you can be. See? So when we're witnessing to people, your evaluation is not whether or not somebody is smart or not that you're talking to. Don't have to be afraid of them if it's being smart. If they are smart, whatever that's defined by, and you're talking to them about presuppositions, their intelligence may come to to the answers that you're presenting more quickly than you get there. And they'll be easier to witness to if they're honest. See? So you're never afraid to talk with people on the basis of it, think, well, boy, I think maybe I'm not smart, and I bet you that person's brilliant, and I better... It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with whether or not we're talking about truth, if we're beginning from presuppositions that match reality. See, say a person builds a whole philosophical set of a lot of ideas, and it's like as if you're piling up building blocks. Say we stack up this big tower of blocks. Now, what if I were to come in here and I were to take out this bottom block that I put in? See, I can't take out this bottom block, and I can't remove it without it making the whole tower fall down, you see. Well, in practice, right? Theoretically, you can't get out real fast and the block just go down one, but if you remove the foundation of a building, see, the whole building falls. And if a person builds a building of conclusions on a wrong idea, and you remove that wrong idea, it removes all the conclusions, doesn't it? So, you do not defeat a false philosophy by showing it to be illogical. You defeat it by showing it to be foolish. You defeat it by showing it to be foolish. And you do that by talking about presuppositions and whether or not those presuppositions are something that ought to be believed. Should a person believe that reality is only a bunch of molecules? No, they shouldn't. That just doesn't match the observations that you see universally throughout the whole world of either people believing they are viable or wishing they were viable or committing suicide because they don't think they are. You see. And the observations of the world, of ourselves, of all that God has created, speaks to us that the Bible is true. And we'll talk here in a later session about the evidences that the Bible is the Word of God. But Psalms 19, verse 1 says, the heavens are actively engaged in declaring the glory of God. The heavens are actively engaged in declaring the glory of God. So from our observations, we see the evidences that speak to us that confirm that what the Bible says is true, that God is there. And that is simply because God is consistent with himself, and what God has said, he has operated consistently with that. And so there's a consistency between the word of revelation he's given us and the world that he has made. And so in Romans 1, verse 18 through 22, for a person to move away from God, they have to push truth out of their minds then, see? And that's why the Apostle Paul writes that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. For that which is known about God is evident within them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so they are without excuse. So it's possible for people to come to a right set of presuppositions and to be able to see the way that all the blocks of reality fit together with that, because God is loving and reasonable, and he has done things in a consistent way. Now, if you're going to get the presupposition to start with, there is an awful lot to know, and God has revealed these things to us, and then he gives us the opportunity to look and to see how they fit together in a consistency. But we need to be willing to listen to God. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 31, the verse there says, the fear of the Lord is the instruction for wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the instruction for wisdom. Now, why does the fear of the Lord have a relationship to wisdom? Why does the fear of the Lord have a relationship to wisdom? The fear of the Lord, you understand, is a sense of being impressed by God, this overwhelming sense of the realization of the greatness of God, and you're caught in a sense of awe about him. Now let's talk about this idea of the fear of the Lord, or the idea of a fear of a being. They give an illustration. Back in 1962, when the Beatles, the rock music group, came to the United States, they had landed in New York City and flown from London, and there was a huge crowd to meet them there at the airport in New York City. And as they're there, people were pressing, and in the front of that crowd, there were girls that fainted when they saw the Beatles, all right? I don't know what that does. We hyperventilate or whatever happens that you end up in fainting. But see, there was such an impression by the occasion that it had an effect upon people. And that effect was brought by other people, and that could appropriately be called the fear of the Beatles, see? Back in 1986, a football team in the United States, the Chicago Bears, won the Super Bowl, the champions that year in football. And one of the players on the team was a player called, what's his name? He's nicknamed the Refrigerator. William Perry, yes. And William Perry weighed 324 pounds. Great, big, huge player. And all that season, people were talking about the fridge, the refrigerator. And you can imagine when the refrigerator was in the airport, can you imagine say you're a 10 or 12-year-old boy there, and here comes the refrigerator walking down in the airport, and you say, "Man, can I have your autograph?" And the refrigerator signs right there, "Fridge," right? And you've got the autograph of the refrigerator. And you suppose that boy ever showed any other boy the autograph that he got from the refrigerator? See, that's what you call the fear of the refrigerator. See, that's being sense of overwhelmed with awe by something. If Billy Graham ever telephoned to me and said, "Can you and Jolene spend a weekend with my wife and I? We'll fellowship together for a weekend at our home in Montreat, North Carolina," I'd say, well, I wouldn't know what to talk to him about, you see. But I'd be overwhelmingly impressed by the situation, not necessarily because I agree about every aspect of Billy Graham's ministry. I don't know if I do or I don't, but I'm impressed by what his character must be. And when I think about, 1949 was when the Billy Graham crusade, had the crusade in Los Angeles, California, and this crusade, the national media published it about all across the United States. And since then, he's had international crusades, and there would be there is hardly any place that Billy Graham could go anywhere in the world but somebody would be there who would recognize him. See, in a great, probably most places around the world, or a great many places at least. See, so there's a wide recognition, and so since 1949 to now, that's about 40, how many years? 50 to 40, 90, 43 years now. For 43 years, Billy Graham has been in national and international recognition, in the limelight. How many reporters and other people do you suppose have investigated Billy Graham, trying to find some scandal about him to make a publicity of it? And he's endured that for 43 years now, right? I have never heard anything. And there's nothing that I'm aware of that's been published. And that speaks to me. It seems to me if there was something rotten to find out somebody, in 43 years, there have been enough people looking, they probably could have found it out, right? And it must be that he is a man of incredible integrity and a tremendous character, godly character. So, see, so that gives us, we have a sense of awe over somebody. It can be on the basis of their abilities or on the basis of their position. What if the President of the United States called up and said, "Lisa, I'd like you to come this Friday, 2 weeks from now on Friday night, and have dinner in the White House with our staff and me. Could you come?" And probably Lisa would have told somebody that she just got a call from the White House, not just simply because if you're contacted by the president or head of any nation, there is a position there. See, so we're impressed by greatness of abilities, or greatness of position, or greatness of character. In the case of people that are tremendously godly in character, as people of integrity. Now, who's got the greatest abilities in the universe? Well, it's God. Who's got the greatest position in the universe? God. He's ruler of the whole universe. He's not over some dinky little nation, right? And who's got the greatest character? Oh, the character of God, the beauty of who he is. to be overwhelmingly impressed, to have this awestruck idea that we'd faint in God's presence like girls fainted at the appearance of the Beatles at the airport in 1962. That's what you call the fear of the Lord, isn't it? It's what you call the fear of the Lord. And if I have this recognition of such a being as this, the result of the fear of the Lord is, I really ought to listen and think about what he has to say. Is that right? And when I'm willing to listen to God, he is the only one who can give me with certainty the right presuppositions from which to live my life. And if I reject God, it's absolute certainty that I will reject some of his presuppositions, and I will be trying to live my life contrary to reality, and I will never come to true wisdom. You see that? The fear of the Lord is the instruction for wisdom. And anyone who is not willing to spend time meditating on his word and hearing what God has to say and thinking it through, they're just limiting their capacity and their opportunity to enter into wisdom and live in the design that God created them to live. The fear of the Lord is the instruction for wisdom. Well, let's stop here. Do you have any questions? For example, you might have some girl sometime that say,
before I begin with the topic that I'm going to be talking about, biblical basis of absolutes, I want to ask a few questions by way of review for you guys. Repetition of this stuff is the best way to learn it. So, why are people valuable?
Because you're created in God's image.
Created in God's image. What are the components of the value? Why is anything valuable? It's based on, there's two main things. Design and purpose. Okay. So people are valuable based on the fact that they're created in the image of God, but they're created with a specific design and for a specific purpose. The purpose of, what's our purpose? Does anybody know?
Relationship.
Love relationship with God and with each other. So, secondly, what makes right right? I am just ticked off. Jim, I just want to deck ya. I feel like punching Jim right now. So why shouldn't I?
It's not right.
Well, it's not right. Okay. Most of the class doesn't like Ernesto. So, and they vote that you all vote, mostly, with only a few people who like him, that I should punch him, that I should deck him.
Thank you.
Why shouldn't I? Because he's valuable? Okay, that's a good answer. How about, I have a very intelligent, rich, and influential friend who thinks that I should punch Sue. And he's very rich, he's very intelligent, and he's influential, so why shouldn't I punch him? Punch Sue. Her. That would be.
Because she has value.
Valuable, and she wasn't designed to be punched.
There you go. You're catching on. So God says that I shouldn't punch people, or I shouldn't kill people. Still, why shouldn't I? We've answered that question. Because I'm valuable. Because you are valuable. Is God arbitrary in his reasoning? Or does he have a sufficient and intelligent reason for the things that he says? God doesn't just say, you shouldn't punch people, so that's why I shouldn't punch them. Although I learn that God is trustworthy, and that what he says, even though I may not understand why, there's a sufficient intelligent reason behind it, but there's more.
Knows our design.
He's the person who designed us, and he's the person who gave us our purpose and designed us for that purpose. God created people with a design and a purpose of love relationship. Now, with design, what comes with design? You've already talked about this morning. Design requirements. And whenever we act opposite or contrary to our design requirements, brings destruction. You guys are great. And why is destruction bad?
It hurts.
It hurts? Why is hurt in that way?
We can't fulfill our purpose.
Because we can't fulfill our purpose of love relationship. So because God has this stuff all figured out, and he gave us a specific design and a specific purpose in our design, which we've determined is love relationship, he gave us instructions for living according to our design requirements, didn't he? And so that we can fulfill our purpose. But again, just to bring it back around to why he gave us instructions for living according to our design. Our design and our purpose makes up what? It's another word that we've discussed already this morning. It's not a new word. Our value, right. And so all this stuff is review, mostly for you guys, but it's leading up to the part that is going to be crucial, I hope. So God's law is to preserve and defend our value, right? Because it's showing us how to live according to our design requirements, so that we can fulfill our purpose. So in a word, it's upholding our value, the value of our existence. So now, under what circumstances is God's law not applicable? Or when is it not applicable?
When it doesn't apply to our design.
Okay. Is there ever a time when God's law is not applicable? Why would that be? Why is there ever a time when God's law would not be applicable to us? Does our value ever change? Does our design or our purpose ever change? We call this an absolute. Something we call a universal, unchanging standard. This is an important definition that you'll need to get down. It's applicable to all people, everywhere, all the time, and under every circumstance, without exception. It seems like I'm almost being very elementary here, but this is a very elementary principle and we need to get it. So, does our value ever change with place? Does it change as time goes along? Does it change in any circumstances that we get into? No. And then is it applicable to everyone equally?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because
We're
we're all equally valuable.
all equally valuable. We all have the same design, although we're individuals. We all have the same design for the same purpose of living in love relationship with God. So then, does God's law, which we've established is for the purpose of upholding our value, our design, and our purpose, if that stuff never changes, then I think we can conclude that God's law never changes. So we say that God's law is an absolute. And so value is the foundation for determining what's right and what's wrong. Okay? I asked you earlier, if I felt like punching Jim, why shouldn't I? Because it's not my feelings that determine what's right, isn't that right? And what if the whole class voted by majority that I should punch Jim? What about that? I mean, everybody's in agreement about it. Majority consensus doesn't determine what's right. What about my rich, intelligent friend? No social elite can determine what's right either. So, God's law is the only basis for us to determine what's right. Does anybody have a question about that? Okay. All right, I want to conclude this part of our session open for questions and things.
Okay, we've been talking about three questions that all people are confronted with. What are those three questions? Number one is, why am I valuable? The second one, is there something that is always right and always wrong? How do I know what is right and wrong? In other words, is there such a thing as morality? So what's the basis of morality is the second question. The first question, why am I valuable? The second question, how do I know what's right and wrong? So that second question deals with, is right and wrong the same for everybody? What's the basis for an absolute, if there is an absolute? An absolute is what's the definition of absolute again?
Never changing.
All right, a universal, unchanging standard, isn't it? Universal applies to every person, everywhere, all the time, without any exceptions. And it's unchanging. And it's a standard that gives us a measure of measuring whether an action is good or if it's evil. And just as you have a measuring stick, a yardstick for measuring distance, God's commandments measure our actions of our lives. And we see if we measure up to what God sees as that loving and ultimate wise way of living that is necessary. And it's absolutely necessary that we live according to the directions of God, because He created us for a specific purpose, and He created us with a specific design. And if we do not live the way God directs us to live, we're going to destroy ourselves just as much as you don't operate your car and take care of it the way it's designed to be cared for. If you don't put air in the tires will be ruined. If you don't keep oil in the engine is going to be destroyed by friction. There's a design there, and the design has metal moving against metal in the engine. If you don't have oil in there, then you have to have that lubrication, and a lubrication is a design requirement of the engine so that you don't have the engine destroyed by heat and friction, or heat and wear that results from friction. So we have a design and we have a purpose. Everybody in the whole world is created in the image of God with the same design. Everybody in the whole world are created for the purpose of relationship with God. Because we're all created with the same design, with the same purpose, the same requirements are upon all of them, and therefore God gave the commandments to all of us. And Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 24 says, "So the Lord commanded us to observe all these commandments and to fear the Lord our God for our good always." So there's three questions. Why am I valuable? Number two, what is the basis of morality? And number three is, how do I know if something is true or if it isn't true? How do I verify knowledge? It's a question of, if somebody tells me something, how do I know if I should believe them? How do you verify what is true? And the first thing we look at is you see the problem that you're confronted with. Say you draw a circle to represent all that there is to know, and then I draw a circle to represent how much I know. Sorry to be boastful, I just can't make that circle any smaller. Now let's think about the reality of that circle. I've given an illustration in the book about, in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., there are 18 million books there. Suppose I have as a project in my mind to read those 18 million books over the next 30 years. How many books would I have to read every day? Well, you take 365 days a year, multiply that by 30, and divide that number in 18 million. And that ends up to be 1,643.8 books every day. Now, I'm not going to be able to read 1,643.8 books a day. And if I read that many books, how do I verify what I'm reading, if it's correct or not anyway? Now, there really would be only two possible ways of doing it. If I already knew all that there is to know, then I could look at what I'm thinking about now and see how it compares with what I already know to be true. But the problem is, I don't know everything there is to know. And so as I'm learning something, I don't have a reference point in my mind where I've already verified what I presently know, if it's true or not. On the basis of me, see, I have this problem of finiteness. I am so tiny. My brain fits right inside my head. That's an incredible revelation, isn't it? You know, you think about now, my brain actually fits right inside my head. And let's compare my head to the size of the universe. You know, the universe, you measure the distance there, light goes at 186,000 miles per second, give or take a few miles. Going at 186,000 miles per second, you go about 6 billion miles in a year. That distance of 6 billion miles, the distance that takes light to get in 1 year, scientists call a light year, and they measure distances in space by a light year. And they say if a star is 40 light years away, it takes 40 years for the light to get to here from that star, and that'd be 40 times 6 billion miles, 240 billion miles. And one lecturer I heard said that they've looked out at stars in space out there a distance of 8 billion light years. How far is 8 billion times 6 billion miles? You know, that's huge, isn't it? And try to imagine a ball that size compared to the size of my head. And that gives me a reality of I'm pretty tiny. And should I suppose that something that fits right inside my head can possibly know all that much? So if I'm going to be able to have a reference point for a comparison to evaluate an idea to see if it is if it's a proper description of reality or if it isn't, I'm going to need some help. And that help would need to come from someone who knows all existing reality, who has a perfect understanding of all existing knowledge. See? And then, having an understanding of all existing knowledge, if that being reveals to me a foundational set of presuppositions, a foundational set of ideas, then I can go back to that yardstick and see if I'm arguing with God or not, see? If I'm arguing with the person who knows all existing knowledge. And if somebody knows all existing knowledge and I disagree with him, who do you suppose is correct? See? So for a Christian, to verify, the approach to verifying truth is a very simple idea. We go and ask God, right? God's giving a revelation. He does the Bible, which is the Bible, and the Bible's not very big. It's only about that thick, depends on the size of the print, right? And so it's something that's readable by all of us. Now, it doesn't tell us everything there is to know, obviously. It's only that thick. You can imagine what it would be like if God tried to tell us everything there is to know in the Bible. We wouldn't have time to read it. God has a problem getting people to study something that big, see? And so He's given us a set of foundational ideas in the area of knowledge, and these are the presuppositions of truth. And so as we reason and investigate our world and live our relationships, all of our thinking and all of our reasoning and all the conclusions that we come to must begin with the foundational set of principles that God has revealed. And so the Bible then is the absolute, the intellectual absolute. It is a universal, unchanging standard. It's universal because all of us live in the same reality. And because all of us live in the same reality, therefore, what God speaks to applies to all of us the same, because it's given this description of the same reality, you see. It's a universal, unchanging standard. It's unchanging because God is a faithful God who has declared His unchangeableness in the consistency of what He's done. And for as long as people have been on the earth, the gravity has pulled people so it keeps their feet on the ground, doesn't it? And so there is an aspect of constancy that God has placed us within, see? And that constancy is a wonderful thing. Think of what it'd be like if there wasn't the faithfulness of God expressed in His creation, so that you had, if you didn't have that faithfulness there expressed in the creation, you wouldn't have any security at all. There wouldn't be any place of reliability. When you're sitting in your chairs here this morning, you wouldn't be sitting here the way you are, but instead you would have your seat belts on. And you'd have your chairs bolted to the floor because you would not know but what at any instant the gravitational field would reverse and you'd start banging your heads on the ceiling, see? You'd never fly in an airplane because if you're flying the airplane, what if the laws of aerodynamics suddenly reverse and it plunges you to the ground, see? And so there's a reality that we fit in, and so while there are things that are dynamic about life and dynamic about the universe, there are also there's an unchanging overriding structure that's there that we live in. That lines up with a constancy about God and expressed in what He has created. And so it's in Him that we live and move and have our being, and in Him all things consist. And so the Bible reveals this unchanging framework then of truth. Okay, now let's look at a couple approaches then to the nature of truth. We talk about, we said before that truth is the description of reality. Truth is a description of reality. And let's look at the biblical, and let's look at approaches to truth, approaches to knowing. And the first one we'll look at is the biblical approach. The Bible begins with the idea of a unity of truth. All right. It's implicitly there when, and in John 14:6, Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Everything lines up in a unity with what Jesus has declared, with what Jesus is, what Jesus has demonstrated, what Jesus has lived out. So he is the source, the origin of creation. He's the focal point of the purpose of our existence. As he came and taught, he taught everything in consistency with the way things really are. And so Jesus is the truth, isn't he? He lived a life which was a living demonstration of the application of truth. And he brought it into our sphere in the demonstration as he lived on this earth, see? A unity of truth. Now, why is it that truth is unified? Well, you got to think truth is a description of reality, a description of, and you just think about the universe. Where did the universe come from? Who's the origin of this, the creator of the universe? See? Created by God. Now, what is there about God? Let's think about what there is about God that would lead to the realization that there's a unity of truth. The Bible reveals that God is a reasonable God, doesn't it? He's an infinitely intelligent God who does things reasonably. So reason has an order, a sequence to it, doesn't it? And secondly, God is loving. And so he wants to do things that are not contradictory. He operates consistently with himself then, see? He's a God of faithfulness. Faithfulness is constancy and consistency. And so on the basis of God's intelligence, his love, his faithfulness, he does things in an orderly, consistent way. God does not fight against himself. And so when he's created a universe, he's created a world which fits together. A consistency, a constancy to the world, the universe that he's created and our world. Now, truth is a description of reality. So truth is describing the constancy of what God has done, and so truth agrees with itself too. Truth doesn't fight against itself. You don't study in physics that one idea is true, and when you come to study in the area of nursing, you find out that idea is false in the realm of nursing. See, truth does not fight against itself. There's a constancy there. Whatever true is true, no matter what subject you're studying, and that's because it's a description of a universe, a reality that's consistent because of that God originates from. That God brings forth out of himself, and he comes out of intelligence and love. So you have a unity of truth, and then God created us in his image, and so therefore he wants to reason with us, and he created us with the capacities for him to be able to communicate to us and we to communicate with him. And Isaiah 1:18 says, "Come, let us reason together. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow." Come, let us reason together. So God's a reasonable God who created us and wants to reason with us. And so he wants us to understand. And so truth is something that's understandable in our minds. It's something we can reason about, something we can think about. But now, we don't have, I don't have a sufficient base for reasoning, because if you reason, you have to begin with with presuppositions, and And I don't, in my tininess, I don't have the capacity to gather all the presuppositions that I need. And so I need God to reveal them, so I need to work on the basis of an absolute. And the absolute is the Bible. It's the revealed written revelation of God. Spoken, verbal. It's in words, isn't it? Now, a second approach to learning has been a traditional Western humanism. And we'll need to put down here a definition of humanism. Humanism is man starting with man to build for himself a worldview and philosophy of life that leaves out God and any divine dimensions. I'll write that here. Man starting with man. To build for himself a worldview and philosophy of life that leaves out God and any divine dimension. Okay. Now, we'll talk more about this definition of humanism later. All we'll say right now is our focal point at this point is simply that it leaves out God. It's operating from people having to begin with doing things without God's help and without God's direction. They want to have an independency from any direction that God would give. But they still had the idea of a unity of truth, that truth would be non-contradictory. And we're going to reason, we're going to talk and debate and discuss, and we're going to come to understand what it is. It's going to be something that we can understand. But, they recognize the problem of our finiteness. We need some way to verify what is true, and so they're looking for an absolute. But the absolute, not looking for a divine revelation, for God to provide an absolute, so that means people working independent of God, starting with man starting with man, that means man has got to come up with his own absolute. There was about 250 BC, there was a Greek philosopher named Protagoras, who said, man is the measure of all things. So man will be able to supply for himself a way of verifying what is true, and he will build it up. And so we're we want to look at our modern last couple hundred years to see what the approach has been the last couple hundred years in the verification of truth, and we'll do that next time. All right, we're talking about how to verify what's true. And as we look here, we see that the Bible has the approach of recognizing that there's a unity of truth because it's the expression of an infinite and intelligent, loving God who's created the universe then in an orderly, consistent way. And so it's not a self-destructive world, and truth is a description of that reality, and so truth is non-contradictory. And then God has created us to reason with Him, and He wants to communicate with us, and He wants us to understand. He knows that my mind is tiny and I can't understand everything, but He knows that there's some things that I must understand. And so He's communicated some things you must understand, Larry Allen, and He wants us to reason about them until we understand. And then there is the absolute. God revealed the foundation from which we are to reason. And Psalms 36 verse 9 says, "In thy light we see light." In thy light we see light. So as we reason out from what God has revealed, we see the extension of that, the application of it. And so we can, it's applicable into every area in which we live. Traditional Western humanism had held to the idea of a unity of truth, and they could reason about it. However, they rejected the absolute God had provided, and so they had to say people will have to come up with their own. Mankind will have to produce their own way to verify what's true, but we can do it because man is the measure of all things. And so around 1799, in the late 1700s, people were beginning to look at the possibility of using science as a means of proving what is true. And so anything would be accepted as true if science proved it's true, but if it wasn't proven by science, you wouldn't know whether it was true or not. You would just have to leave it as a matter of opinion or religion or feeling. But science would be the absolute, and whatever science verified as being true would be accepted as true. And there was a writer, Robert Blakey, wrote a book, Secular Christianity and God Who Acts. He just expresses in that this statement. He says, "Secular man's deepest and most unquestioned assumption is that science ultimately is the only source of true knowledge, and anything that cannot be investigated by the empirical methods of science is probably not real." And so we need to evaluate whether or not science can be the absolute. But before we do that, we need to look at some ideas and talk about reality and talk about ourselves a bit. And that involves a definition of 4 words. The first word is the word phenomenal. And that is something is phenomenal if it is observable through the physical senses. Okay. So it's, in other words, if something would be called phenomenal if you can see it, or you can taste it, or you can touch it, smell it, or hear it. Let's see, it's a pen here is something I can see, I can touch it, I can no smell to it, try to taste it, no taste, and hear it when it hits against something else, and so here's a phenomenal pen. Let's see. So this my glasses are phenomenal. See, anything that is very simply observable to us is something that's phenomenal. And then you have noumenal. And something noumenal is above and beyond the grasp of the physical senses. Something that you cannot see it, you cannot taste it, you cannot touch it, you cannot smell it, you cannot hear it, but it's real. It's declaring that it actually exists, that it's real, but it's something that you nevertheless, even though it's real, it's something that goes beyond the capacity of your physical senses to grasp it. Okay, name something for me that would be noumenal. Jeremy?
Mind?
Your mind, okay. Now some people would deny that there is such a thing as a mind because they deny that there would be anything that's noumenal or anything spiritual. For example, a philosopher in the this century, Bertrand Russell in England, he made the following declaration. He said he believing that there was no mind, that everything about us relates then so what we call the mind would be the brain, some aspect of the brain, and so he goes through this following series of thinking. He says, when we die, we're buried, and when we're buried in the casket, what happens to our body? Decomposes, it's gone, and when it decomposes, what happens to the brain? Brain's gone too. And if the brain's gone, what happens to your memory? Well, it'd be gone too. And it says if your memory is gone, what is there left to you? And then he, from the presupposition and series of logical statements following that, he comes to a conclusion. He says, therefore I conclude there is no life after death. See. And so he makes a logical deduction that there is no life after death, beginning from a presupposition that our existence is only phenomenal, that there is no noumenal aspect, the mind. See? But, we can't get at, see, like you have an imagination. Donna, you got an imagination? Put it right there. I want to see it. If I can't see something, I don't believe it. Okay. What else is noumenal?
Pain.
All right, probably pain. You don't actually. Maybe you feel it, but yeah. But nevertheless, you feel it in your body, don't you? So there's a feeling that's going there. There's nerves that are being activated, so that would be phenomenal, because that's something that you feel. Just name something else. Name something that's noumenal.
Spirit.
All right, a spirit. Is there a spiritual aspect to man? Are there demons? And are there angels? And what about God? John 1:18 says, no man has seen God at any time, but Jesus has revealed him or disclosed him to us, right? He explained him. Now, so God is real, but noumenal. Is that right? Able to bring forth actions in our physical world. He's opened up the Red Sea. No, the Israelites that day, I don't think saw God do it, but this east wind came up and it blew those waters apart, didn't it? And here is something that God is bringing forth an appropriate control of the physical realm to separate the Red Sea so they could walk through on dry land. Okay.
You can feel God, you can hear God. It's the same unprovable as you can prove that you have pain. You can't prove that you have pain. You can't prove that you feel God.
Well, that's true. You can't prove that you have pain, can you? Because it's entirely within you and nobody else can. They can't measure your pain on... Okay, so I guess maybe from an observer other than you, it's true that pain is noumenal, isn't it? Yes. And God, when God opened up the Red Sea and that happened, people didn't actually see him do that. And so it's something that's not verifiable through the physical senses. It's something. What is verifiable through the physical senses is that Red Sea opened up and people walked through on dry ground, isn't it? All right. Now let's think about some things. Think about things like electricity. Electricity is in the physical realm. It's something physical, just as much as this pen's physical. But electrons are something that are too small to see. I could stick my fingers over there in that electrical socket, but if I did, I would feel something. I'd jump back and say, those electrons bit me. I got bit by electricity, but I didn't actually see them bite me. See? And so electricity is something that really goes close to being noumenal, doesn't it? How do we know that an electron exists? See, the smallest thing that we can see right now is using an electron microscope. And what an electron microscope does is it sends out beams of electrons at an object, and then they bounce back out the object and come back in and do an exposure on a photographic plate or on film, and or on a display monitor now, whatever they would use, and you get an image of what they bounce back from, see. But now, if you try to use an electron microscope, in order to see an electron, see, the electron is real tiny. So when you try to see this electron, the electron coming out hits it, and it stays right here, and this electron takes off, doesn't it? So your electron would never come back to report what it collided with. And so therefore, you cannot use an electron microscope to see an electron. So no man has ever seen an electron at any time. Well, how do we know whether or not electrons exist or not, then? Well, you do that by the evidence. And the best ways to gather evidence of the electron is by using a bubble chamber. And a bubble chamber is a particular liquid in a chamber. And this liquid, when electrons or a electrically charged particle goes through a liquid, it rips apart some of the bonding of the molecules together. And so if you got two atoms here together, one gets ripped off, that rips off it's called an ionization of your substance, and when it's separated from the liquid, it's in a gaseous state, and see, so when you have gas suspended in liquid, that's bubbles, isn't it? And so when this charged particle rips through the bubble chamber, it leaves a trail of bubbles where it went. And so you can see that something went through there because you see the trail of bubbles. And then they put electrical charge across this chamber. And so you have a positive charge over here and a negative charge over there. And then you shoot the electron in, and when the electron goes in, you see a trail of bubbles that go on a given arc. Now, they do two things. They measure the time. They know, they time when it goes in and when it leaves. So they know how long it took. They know the time. And then they can measure the circle here, measure the arc, measure the curvature. And so from that, there is a relationship between speed or velocity and mass and this curvature. They can calculate an acceleration. There's a formula relating acceleration and velocity and mass together, and by measuring this curve and measuring the time it took for it to go, they can calculate the mass. It had to weigh this much. And so from the evidence, and they calculate that something actually did go through there because there's a trail of particles. I mean a trail of bubbles, excuse me. And you know that it weighs a certain amount because it took this much time and it went on this kind of a curve. And so you calculate the mass. And then you know that it had a negative charge because it curved to the positive side, see? And so from the evidence verifies that an electron exists with a certain weight and a negative charge to it because it went to the positive pole. And but no man has seen an electron at any time, but the bubble chamber has revealed it to us, you see. You understand that on the same basis that people believe in the existence of an electron, we have that same basis of understanding and knowing God's existence. No man has seen God at any time, but we've seen what God has done through the world. And Psalms 19:1 says the heavens are actively engaged in declaring the glory of God. And so Paul writes in Romans 1:19, he says, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes and eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made. So there is the evidence there of things occurring in the phenomenal realm that reveal the existence of God. Just the same as when the electron goes through the bubble chamber, you see the evidence of the existence of the electron, even though you have never seen the electron. All right, so we're talking about something phenomenal, which is observable, something noumenal, which itself is not observable, but you can gather evidence of it. And then you have something objective. And it has real existence outside of our thoughts. Real existence outside the realm of our thoughts. All right, name something which is objective. All right, the spirit. Okay. God has real existence. In other words, if I stop thinking about God, does God then stop existing? No, he exists whether I think about him or not, right? He exists whether I believe in him or not. So I don't have to believe in God for him to exist. By my refusing to believe in his existence, it does not make God go away, does it? All right. So God is noumenal and objective, isn't he? All right, name something phenomenal and objective. A chair. Okay, good. All right, your chairs we're sitting in. We can see it and whatever, and it exists whether you believe that the chair exists or not. All right, then let's look at the last word we want to talk about here is the word subjective. All right, and that is the realm of our thoughts. The realm of our thoughts. So that is what? Name things that are subjective then. All right, my presuppositions. All right, my thoughts, my opinions, my beliefs. All right. All right, my beliefs are my beliefs. My views are my views. And my view is subjective. Now, though my view is subjective, now is it true or is it false? Pardon me?
Depends on if it's based on.
All right. Okay. For it to be true, what does it have to be? What does my opinion have to be for my opinion to be true? Pardon me? All right. Right. It has to be a correct description of reality, doesn't it? It has to be the description of reality. So something can be my opinion, but my opinion is true, nevertheless, because it is the description of reality, isn't it? Okay. So whether something is subjective or not has nothing to do with whether it is true or not. I can be subjectively true, be subjectively right, or I can be subjectively wrong. I have my view of God. Is my view of God true or is it false? It depends on whether God is really the way I believe him to be or not. Is that right? So if my view, if my opinion matches the objective reality, it is true. It has to actually to describe reality the way things truly are. Okay. All right. We've talked about these 4 ideas here. We want to just have some opportunity for questions before we go on from here. All right. We want to think about. We've talked about phenomenal and noumenal and objective and subjective. And my view, when we get to the area of talking about things that are subjective, I am always subjective. I am always reasoning and thinking from the basis of the presuppositions that I believe. And so I always evaluate things on the basis of my presuppositions. And so if I have a wrong presupposition, that's always, if I stay logically consistent with that wrong presupposition, it'll take me logically to a wrong conclusion in some area. And so if I have a correct presupposition, then I'll logically reason to a correct conclusion if I don't contradict it, if I remain logical. Now, but no matter, in all my thinking, it's always my thinking, so that I am always subjective. I've heard the statement before, we ought to back up for a few minutes. I've got this problem I can't figure out. I'm going to have to try to get objective about the situation. Okay, now let's see if I can get objective for a moment while I step back, take a few steps back and get away. Oh, my mind came with me. Maybe I didn't go fast enough. Still, my mind came with me, see. In other words, it's impossible to ever not have my views being my views. What I can do, I can have a change of my views as I look to an objective standard. For the Christian has an objective standard, and that objective standard is the Bible. Really, the Bible is the only place of true objectivity in the world, because the Bible comes with its source not from man but from God. So I have a reference point of objectivity in the Bible, but I cannot create that objective. I cannot create my objectivity myself, because no matter where I go, my mind goes with me. And so we're always in a process then of having our mind renewed with truth, see? And see, that's why all of us can always be wrong. And you don't believe something simply because Larry Allen teaches it, see? And when the Apostle Paul came, people didn't believe it simply because it was the Apostle Paul teaching it. You think about when they went to Berea, it describes in Acts chapter 17, verse 11. And Luke writes there, as he writes the book of Acts, and the Bereans were more noble-minded than those of Thessalonica, for they received the word of God with great eagerness, searching the Scriptures daily to see whether these things were so. So here we have a point of objectivity. Here we have the Bible. Here's something that God has spoken. And God is reliable because God knows that whole circle of all existing knowledge. He has a perfect perspective of reality. And he says, here is the foundation from which you must reason. So it's impossible for people to ever come to subjectivity. All we can do is take our subjectivity and submit it to the objective standard that God has revealed. Okay.